I signed the divorce papers in complete silence while my husband's mistress laughed at me. They thought I was weak, broken, just another discarded wife who'd fade into nothing. But what they didn't know, I was carrying his father's grandchild, and that billionaire father-in-law, he was about to make me the sole heir to his empire. Let me tell you how I destroyed them all, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ashes and regret. My name is Brooklyn, and 3 years ago I thought I was marrying my soulmate. Jacob was charming, sophisticated, and came from the kind of wealth that most people only see in movies. I was just an architect from a middle-class family, working 60-hour weeks to help my parents pay off medical bills. When Jacob pursued me after we met at a gallery opening, I thought it was fate. I was so stupid, so blind, so beautifully, tragically naive. The first year was decent, not perfect, but decent. Jacob's family, though? That was a different nightmare entirely. His stepmother, Catherine, looked at me like I was dirt she'd scraped off her designer heels. Every family dinner was a performance where she'd make subtle digs about my background, my clothes, my education. Jacob's sister, Sophie, was even worse. She'd accidentally spill wine on me, invite me to events and dress codes I didn't know existed, and then laugh when I showed up wrong. I endured it all because I loved Jacob, or at least I loved who I thought he was. But Catherine's hatred wasn't just snobbery. I didn't know it then, but she had a plan. I was never supposed to last. I was just a placeholder, a temporary wife to keep Raymond happy. Raymond, Jacob's father, was the only one who treated me like a human being. He was this intimidating billionaire who built an $8 billion empire from nothing. But with me, he was gentle. He taught me chess on quiet Sunday afternoons. He asked about my architecture dreams. He listened when I talked. Catherine hated that most of all. Everything changed 4 months ago. I'd been feeling off for weeks, exhausted and nauseous. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, and my heart exploded with joy. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I wanted to tell Jacob that night, planned this whole romantic reveal. But when I got home early from the doctor's office, I heard voices in his study. The door was cracked open, and I heard my husband's voice mixing with his sister's. "Once you divorce her, we split Dad's fortune 3 ways," Sophie was saying. "Catherine's already got the lawyers ready. We just need to move before she gets pregnant." My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. Jacob laughed. Actually laughed. "Jennifer's already playing her part perfectly. Brooklyn's so pathetic she doesn't suspect a thing. Once Dad dies, we'll be free of both of them." That's when I understood. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. Jennifer, his secretary and supposedly his college girlfriend, wasn't just a mistress. She was part of a coordinated plan involving his entire family to get rid of me before Raymond died. Because Raymond had terminal cancer. 6 months to live, they said, and apparently he'd told them he was leaving me a significant portion of his estate. I should have confronted them right there, screamed, cried, thrown things, but something cold and calculating settled over me instead. I walked backward silently, left the house, and sat in my car for 2 hours, thinking. Then I went to a tech store and bought the tiniest cameras and recording devices they had. If they wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules first. For 3 months, I became a ghost in my own life. I smiled at family dinners while recording every conversation. I planted cameras in Jacob's office, in our bedroom, in Catherine's sitting room when I visited. I documented everything. The affair with Jennifer, Sophie's scheme to seduce Raymond's business partners to gain inside information, Jacob's embezzlement from the family company, siphoning money into offshore accounts. And the most horrifying discovery of all, evidence that Catherine had murdered Raymond's first wife 20 years ago, poison made to look like a heart attack. The same poison she'd been slipping into my drinks at family dinners, trying to make me seem unstable, forgetful, weak. I found emails between Catherine and a doctor she'd bribed, medical records she'd falsified about me, a plan to have me committed to a psychiatric facility once the divorce was finalized. They weren't just trying to get rid of me, they were trying to erase me completely. The only person I told was Raymond. Not everything, not at first. But I started spending more time with him, learning about his business, asking questions. He was sharper than anyone gave him credit for. One afternoon, during our chess game, he looked at me and said, "You know, don't you?" I met his eyes. "Know what?" "That my family is made of snakes." He moved his queen. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" That's when I showed him everything, every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. We sat in his private study for 6 hours, and I watched this powerful man's face crumble as he realized the depth of his family's betrayal. But then something else happened. His grief transformed into something sharp and deadly. "I have a plan," he said quietly, "but it requires you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" I was 3 months pregnant now, still hiding it. "What kind of plan?" "The kind where we burn them all down and rise from the ashes." He smiled, and it wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who'd built an empire by crushing his enemies. "But first, we need to let them think they've won." The divorce was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. Catherine insisted it happen at her lawyer's office, which should have been my first clue about how orchestrated everything was. When I arrived, there were photographers outside. Actual paparazzi, ready to capture my humiliation. Catherine had leaked the story to the press, painting me as an unstable gold digger who'd trapped her poor son. Inside the conference room, they were all waiting. Jacob sat at the head of the table like a king, Jennifer beside him wearing my wedding necklace, the one Jacob's grandmother had given me. They'd stolen it from my jewelry box. Sophie lounged in her chair, filing her nails, barely looking up when I entered. And Catherine, she sat there with this satisfied smirk, like a cat who'd finally caught the mouse. "Brooklyn," Catherine said sweetly, venom dripping from every word. "So glad you could join us. Let's make this quick, shall we? Sign the papers, take your nothing, and disappear from our lives." The lawyer pushed documents across the table. I scanned them quickly. $0. A non-disclosure agreement that would legally prevent me from ever speaking about the family. A clause requiring me to leave the city within 30 days, and a statement I had to sign admitting I'd married Jacob under false pretenses. "This is generous, really," Sophie added, examining her nails. "You should be grateful we're not suing you for emotional damages." Jennifer actually giggled. She leaned into Jacob and whispered something I couldn't hear, but they both laughed. My husband and his mistress, mocking me in front of his family. "Brooklyn, darling," Catherine continued, standing up to tower over me, "you were never one of us. You're a parasite who latched onto my son, and now it's time to let go. Sign the papers, or we'll destroy your father's little business. We'll make sure your family never works in this city again." My father's auto repair shop. They'd done their research, found the one pressure point that might make me crumble. Jacob finally spoke. "Just sign, Brooklyn. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You had a good run, got to live in luxury for 3 years. Be grateful for that and move on." I looked at each of them, really looked at them. These people who'd plotted my destruction like it was a board game, who'd stolen from me, poisoned me, humiliated me, who thought I was too weak, too broken, too nothing to fight back. I picked up the pen. Catherine's smile widened. Sophie actually clapped her hands together softly. Jennifer whispered something that sounded like, "Finally." I signed every page, initialed every clause, didn't read a single word, just signed and signed and signed. When I finished, I placed the pen down carefully and looked up at them with tears in my eyes. "There," I whispered. "Are you happy now?" "Ecstatic," Catherine said. "Now get out." I stood up slowly, gathering my purse. Then I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I pressed play. Catherine's voice filled the room, crystal clear from the recording. "Once Raymond's dead, we'll split everything 3 ways. Brooklyn will be in a psychiatric facility by then, declared incompetent. We'll use the poison diagnosis to prove she was always unstable." The color drained from Catherine's face. Jacob's voice came next. "Jennifer's playing her part perfectly. Dad actually believes I'm faithful. Once we get Brooklyn committed, we'll contest the will together." Sophie tried to grab the phone, but I held up my hand. That's just one recording. I have 47 more. Video, audio, documents, everything. I pulled out a folder from my bag and spread its contents across the table. Bank statements showing Jacob's embezzlement. $50 million stolen from Raymond's company over 2 years. Emails between Sophie and Raymond's business competitors, selling company secrets. Text messages between Catherine and a doctor, discussing the best ways to poison me without detection. And the final piece, the one that made Catherine stumble backward. A forensic report I'd commissioned privately, analyzing the medical records of Raymond's first wife. Poison. The same compound Catherine had been using on me. "You killed her," I said softly, looking at Catherine. "You murdered Raymond's wife so you could marry him and get access to his money, and you've been trying to kill me too." The room was silent except for Jennifer's sharp intake of breath. She was staring at Jacob like she'd never seen him before, like she was realizing she'd been a pawn in something much darker than a simple affair. Jacob found his voice first. "You can't prove any of this. I already have." I smiled, and it felt like ice forming on my lips. "Copies of everything went to the FBI 3 days ago. They've been building a case. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because they wanted to see if you'd incriminate yourselves further at this meeting." I pointed to my purse. "I've been recording this entire conversation too. Every threat, every admission, everything." Sophie stood up so fast her chair fell over. "You little—" "Don't." My voice was sharp, cutting through her rage. "You wanted to play games with someone you thought was weak. You forgot that Raymond taught me chess, and in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board." I walked to the door, then turned back. "Oh, and one more thing." I pulled out an envelope and tossed it on the table. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant. That's Raymond's grandchild, the legitimate heir you were all so desperate to prevent. Congratulations, you played yourselves." Jacob's face went white. Catherine actually staggered, grabbing the table for support. "And Sophie?" Sophie screamed. I walked out of that office with my head high, leaving chaos behind me. Waiting outside was a man in a black suit, Raymond's head of security. "Mrs. Brooklyn," he said respectfully, "Mr. Raymond is waiting." The drive to the marina was quiet. I stared out the window, watching the city pass by, feeling nothing and everything all at once. My phone was exploding with calls from Jacob, from Catherine, from their lawyers. I turned it off. The yacht, the Serenity, was even more massive than I remembered. I'd only been on it once before, for a family gathering where Catherine had made sure I felt uncomfortable the entire time. Now boarding it felt different. The crew members greeted me by name, showing me respect I'd never received from Jacob's family. Raymond was waiting on the upper deck, seated at a table with the sunset behind him. He looked frail, thinner than the last time I'd seen him, but his eyes were sharp as ever. When he saw me, he stood and opened his arms. I walked into them and finally let myself break. I sobbed into his chest while he held me, stroking my hair like I was his own daughter. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured. "I know what they did. I know everything." When I finally pulled back, wiping my eyes, he guided me to sit. There was champagne on the table, which he noticed me eyeing. "Sparkling cider for you," he said with a small smile, pouring me a glass. "I know about the baby. Congratulations." "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the baby? 2 weeks. Your doctor is an old friend. He wanted to make sure you were safe given what Catherine's been doing." Raymond's expression darkened. "About Catherine's poisoning? 6 months. I've been documenting everything while waiting for the right moment." My heart stopped. 6 months? You knew and you didn't? Stop her? Expose them? He shook his head. "Brooklyn, I needed to see who you really were. Whether you'd run or fight. Whether you had the strength to survive in a world that would eat you alive." He took my hand. "You passed every test. You gathered evidence, built a case, protected yourself. You did what I would have done. But why? Why test me at all?" Raymond was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. Because Catherine killed my first wife, Margaret, the love of my life, the mother of my children, and I didn't see it until it was too late." His voice cracked. "Margaret tried to tell me something was wrong, that she felt sick all the time. I thought she was just stressed. By the time I realized it was poison, she was gone." "Raymond," I whispered. "Jacob isn't my biological son," he continued, and my world tilted again. "Catherine was already pregnant when we married, from an affair with our gardener. I found out years later through a DNA test. Sophie knows. She's been blackmailing Catherine for years. My real children, my 2 sons from Margaret, they died in a car accident 10 years ago. The brakes were cut. I've always suspected Catherine, but I could never prove it." I felt sick. This family was even more twisted than I'd imagined. "You remind me of Margaret," Raymond said softly. "Your kindness, your strength, the way you see beauty in everything. When Jacob brought you home, I saw a chance at redemption, a chance to save someone this time." He squeezed my hand. "And you became the daughter I lost, the family I should have protected." Tears were streaming down my face again. "I don't understand. What happens now?" "Now?" Raymond's expression shifted into something cold and calculating. "Now we destroy them. Completely, utterly, so thoroughly that they'll never recover." He pulled out his phone and made a video call. Within seconds, his lawyer appeared on screen. And behind the lawyer, I could see more people joining. My stomach dropped when I recognized them. Catherine, Jacob, Sophie, all summoned to a video conference call they couldn't refuse. "Good evening, family," Raymond said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "I'm calling to read you my last will and testament, right now, with witnesses." Catherine's face on the screen went pale. "Raymond, darling, this isn't necessary." "Quiet." The single word silenced her. I'd never heard Raymond use that tone before. "Brooklyn is here with me. She'll be witnessing this as well." The lawyer began reading. I listened in stunned silence as Raymond dismantled everything his family thought they'd inherit. 60% of his $8 billion empire to me, every property, every business, every investment, 30% to my unborn child, held in trust until they turned 25, 10% to various charities, and for Catherine, Jacob, and Sophie, $1 each, along with letters exposing every crime they'd committed to be delivered to prosecutors. Jacob was screaming. Sophie was crying. Catherine's face had gone completely white. "You can't do this!" she shrieked. "I'm your wife!" "You're a murderer," Raymond said calmly, "and in 48 hours you'll be in custody. The FBI has everything they need. Brooklyn's evidence, my documentation, witness testimonies I've been collecting for years. It's over, Catherine. You've lost." "This is because of her." Catherine pointed at me through the screen, her face contorted with rage. "That little nobody poisoned you against us." "No," Raymond said quietly. "You did this to yourselves. You poisoned my wife. You killed my sons. You stole from my company. You tried to murder Brooklyn and erase your own grandchild. This isn't revenge, Catherine. This is justice." He ended the call. The silence that followed was deafening. "There's one more thing," Raymond said, turning to me. "I'm not actually dying." I stared at him. "What?" "The terminal cancer diagnosis was fake. I created it to test them, to see what they'd do if they thought I was dying, and they revealed themselves exactly as I knew they would." He smiled sadly. "I'm 75 years old, Brooklyn, and I'm healthy. I've got another good decade in me, maybe more, which means I'll be here to see my grandchild grow up, if you'll let me." The tears came again, but this time they were different. Relief, joy, disbelief, all mixed together. "You're not dying?" "I'm not dying, but they are, metaphorically speaking." He raised his glass of champagne. "To the end of one empire and the beginning of another." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. The FBI moved fast. Jacob was arrested at his apartment for $50 million in embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming, every transaction documented. Sophie was caught at the airport trying to flee to Switzerland, stopped by federal agents. And Catherine, They arrested her at a spa in the middle of a massage, charging her with 2 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. The media went absolutely insane. Every news channel ran the story. Billionaire family criminal empire exposed. Stepmother poisoned wife to steal fortune. Pregnant heir saves herself and unborn child. My face was everywhere, and Raymond's PR team made sure I was painted as the victim who'd turned warrior. Jennifer, Jacob's mistress, gave an exclusive interview where she claimed she'd been manipulated by Sophie, paid to seduce Jacob and help destroy me. I don't know if I believed her, but watching her sob on national television about being used provided its own satisfaction. She'd betrayed me, but she'd been betrayed too. Raymond announced my position as CEO of his company the same day, not creative director of some division. CEO, Chief Executive Officer of an $8 billion empire. The board of directors, most of whom were corrupt and loyal to Catherine, were fired within hours. I brought in new people, young innovators, women who'd been overlooked, minorities who'd never gotten their chance. My first major decision? Redesigning every property in the Raymond Hotel's portfolio. My architecture background, the career I'd given up for Jacob, finally had a purpose. I poured everything into it, working 16-hour days despite being pregnant, creating designs that were bold and beautiful and nothing like the stuffy traditional aesthetic Catherine had insisted on. The company's stock soared. Investors loved the new direction. Within 3 months, we'd increased the company's value to $12 billion. I wasn't just maintaining Raymond's empire, I was expanding it. But the business success was only part of my revenge. The personal destruction I inflicted? That was art. Jacob's apartment building, the luxury penthouse he loved, I bought the entire building and evicted him. Legally, properly, with 30 days' notice. He ended up in a tiny studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, paying rent he could barely afford because all his assets had been frozen. Catherine's favorite restaurant, the one where she'd hosted her society luncheons and made me feel small, I purchased it and banned her for life. I also bought her favorite spa, her country club membership, every place she'd ever made me feel unwelcome. And I closed those doors to her permanently. Sophie's fashion brand, her pride and joy. I acquired it for pennies on the dollar when her legal troubles destroyed its reputation. Then I shut it down completely, donating all the inventory to homeless shelters. Every dress she'd designed, given away to people she'd have sneered at. I made sure my family was taken care of, too. My father's small auto repair shop? I invested $10 million, expanding it into a chain of luxury car service centers. My dad cried when I told him he'd never have to worry about money again. My mother, who'd been delaying knee surgery because of cost. She got the best orthopedic surgeon in the country. My younger brother's student loans? Paid in full. I lifted everyone I loved while crushing everyone who'd hurt me. The trial was a media spectacle. Catherine was charged with murdering Margaret, Raymond's first wife, and attempting to murder me. The evidence was overwhelming. Hair samples showing poison accumulation. Emails discussing dosages. Testimony from the bribed doctor who'd turned state's witness. Jacob faced 15 counts of embezzlement and fraud. Sophie was charged with corporate espionage, theft, and conspiracy. They tried to turn on each other, each claiming the others were the masterminds. It was pathetic to watch. I had to testify. Walking into that courtroom, 7 months pregnant, wearing a navy suit that cost more than Jacob used to spend on me in a year, I felt powerful. I sat in the witness box and calmly recounted every detail. The poisoning, the conspiracy, the systematic destruction they'd planned for me. Catherine screamed at me from the defense table. Actually stood up and screamed, calling me every vile name she could think of. The judge had to have her removed. Jacob just stared at me with hollow eyes, finally understanding what he'd lost. And Sophie? Sophie cried the whole time, mascara running down her face, looking nothing like the polished, cruel woman who'd tormented me. The verdicts came swift and harsh. Catherine got 25 years for murder and attempted murder. Jacob got 15 years for financial crimes. Sophie got 10 years for her role in everything. No parole for any of them. They'd die in prison or close enough to it. Jennifer got immunity for testifying, but her reputation was destroyed. No one would hire her. She ended up working as an assistant at a small firm, making barely enough to survive. When she reached out to apologize months later, I didn't respond. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Now, 6 months after that courthouse victory, I'm standing on the deck of the Serenity again. The yacht Raymond insisted I keep because, as he said, every queen needs a castle. I'm hosting a charity gala for women escaping domestic violence, using my story to help others find their strength. My son was born 3 months ago, Jackson Raymond. He has my eyes, and thank God, nothing of Jacob's features. Raymond is beside me now, holding his grandson with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect," he whispers. "Margaret would have loved him." I'm engaged, too. To Adrian, the lawyer who helped Raymond and me build our case against his family. Adrian saw me at my worst, covered in fear and rage, and he saw my strength. He's nothing like Jacob. He's patient and kind and treats me like an equal. Our wedding is next spring, small and private, nothing like the circus my first wedding was. Jacob sent a letter from prison last week. I haven't opened it. I don't need his apologies or explanations. I don't need closure from him. I found my closure in building something beautiful from the ashes of what he tried to destroy. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying silent for so long, if I wish I'd confronted them earlier, fought back immediately when I first learned of their betrayal, but I don't, because silence gave me time. Time to gather evidence, to build an unshakable case, to plan every move with precision. If I'd screamed and raged, they would have destroyed me. Instead, I smiled and documented, and when I finally struck, it was with the force of 3 months of calculated fury. Raymond is teaching Jackson chess now, even though he's just a baby. "Never too early to learn strategy," he says with a wink. He's healthy and happy, and true to his word, he's been the grandfather my son deserves. He legally adopted me 6 months ago, too. I'm Brooklyn Raymond now, officially his daughter, officially part of a real family. The empire continues to grow. We just acquired 3 more hotel chains. My designs are winning international awards. I'm on the Forbes list of most powerful women in business. Not bad for the girl they thought they could erase. Sometimes, late at night when Jackson is sleeping and Adrian is beside me, I think about that conference room. The moment I signed those papers while they laughed, how weak they thought I was, how easily they believed I'd just disappear. They were wrong. I didn't disappear. I evolved. I transformed from a woman they could crush into a force they could never survive. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And now I'm not just a garden. I'm an entire forest, vast and powerful and unshakable. And they're nothing but fertilizer beneath my roots. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't loud or quick. It's not violence or screaming matches. The best revenge is rising so far above them that they become irrelevant. It's taking everything they tried to steal and building it into something they could never imagine. It's living so well, so successfully, so beautifully, that your very existence becomes their punishment. I didn't just beat them. I made them watch as I became everything they feared I could be. And that is the sweetest victory of all.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.